doing programs like that. It's on the sly, and we need to bring it out in the open.
Well, Michael Hirsch, I appreciate Chief Correspondent for the National Journal. Thanks so much. Great article.
Thank you.
We'll head right now to the House floor for the morning hour on the House floor.
Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., November 30th, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mo Brooks to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5th, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past weekend, I joined millions of Americans in celebrating Thanksgiving with friends and family. As Americans, each of us has so much to be thankful for this holiday season. America is the greatest, most free country in the history of the world. As a nation, we can do anything we set out to accomplish. We've built the world's most free and successful republic right here in America. We've used innovation to cure disease, fight hunger, and spread the message of freedom all across the globe. We've changed the way societies interact by inventing things like the telephone, the automobile, and the airplane. We've built some of the finest schools and universities in the history of the planet. We've changed our world for the better, but none of it would have been possible without the grace and blessings of our Almighty God. That's why I was both surprised and disappointed that President Obama failed to make a single reference to God during his Thanksgiving address to the nation. Since the President has a history of doing this sort of thing, it's hard to believe that this was simply an oversight on his part. Perhaps this glaring omission was an attempt at being politically correct. But regardless of the intention, there's no excuse for once again leaving out the one whom the foundation of our liberties rest. What did our founding fathers say in the Declaration of Independence? Not that our rights come from governments, but rather that our rights come directly from God. As the Apostle Paul said, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." We should never pass up an opportunity to thank the Lord for the blessings He has bestowed upon our great nation. I know the specter of political correctness looms over our country more than ever before. There's a lot of pressure from elements within our society to censor public comments about faith in Jesus Christ. Groups like the ACLU seek to drive God out of our schools and our classrooms. Universities are discouraged from praying before graduation and athletic events. And some shopping malls and radio stations would rather play Christmas music only about Santa Claus and never mention the reason for the season, Jesus Christ. Seeking guidance from the Lord through prayer and thanking Him for the blessings He has given our nation is something our country should do more of, not less. Praying and giving thanks to God for all blessing was the example set for us by the first settlers who came to America for religious freedom. Times were tough for them. They endured bitterly cold winters, food shortages, and plagues. The early settlers faced insurmountable odds, but they kept the faith, persevered, and later thrived, leading to the formation of this great nation. General George Washington, who went on to become our first president, was known for frequently stopping whatever he was doing and getting down on one knee to seek guidance from the Lord and to praise Him for the blessings that were given His troops. Here in this building, there's a chapel where members of Congress can go to pray for our country. And in that chapel, there is a beautiful stained glass window depicting our first president, George Washington, in his colonial uniform, frozen, kneeling in prayer. That chapel should be a reminder for all of us that our country's faith should be nothing to hide, but rather something to embrace and protect. And that image of George Washington in prayer should be a reminder that our leaders need to seek wisdom of the Lord whenever possible. For the past several weeks, former Heisman Trophy winner and current starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos, Tim Tebow, has come under fire for publicly professing his faith. Facing mounting criticism from the media, from sports commentators, and even some of his own teammates, Tim Tebow gave the following response to reporters, a response that I believe perfectly explains how our country should recognize God. Quarterback Tebow said this: "If you're married and you really love your wife, is it good enough only to say to your wife, 'I love her,' the day you get married? Or should you tell her every single day when you wake up and every opportunity?" My relationship with Jesus Christ is the most important thing in my life. So anytime I get the opportunity to tell him that I love him, or given the opportunity to shout him out on national TV, I'm going to take that opportunity. And so as I look, I look at it as a relationship that I have with him, that I want to give him the honor and the glory anytime I have the opportunity. Tim Tebow's brave comments are an excellent reminder that we need to look for every opportunity to thank the Lord for our blessings of liberty that he's bestowed upon this great country. May God forgive this nation of its sins. May he overlook the times we forget to thank him for his gifts. And may our people turn to him for guidance and salvation. And may he continue to bless the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a sign of maturity to be able to retain two different but related concepts in your head at the same time. For instance, taxes should not be raised on the majority of working Americans while the economy is in this very difficult situation, but a little more can reasonably be paid by those who are extremely well off. The simple fact is that our economy and our families cannot afford to take the economic hit that is poised to pull $100 billion out of the economy with the expiration of the 2% payroll tax holiday that's scheduled to expire this year. There is currently a proposal that's being debated in the other body that I hope will have the opportunity to vote on here, to be able to extend and expand the payroll tax cut and pay for it. Under this proposal, employees would receive a 50% additional cut in the payroll tax, cutting it essentially in half, and employers would have a slight reduction in the payroll tax that they pay on their employees up to the first 3.1% of payroll, $5 million of payroll. This would help 98% of businesses, but not give unnecessary giveaways to large and profitable organizations. And most important, it would prevent the typical family from suffering a significant increase in their taxes while the economy is still fragile. This proposal would give the average family $1,500 a year extra to spend. You would think that people ought to be able to correlate those two concepts. The way that this would be financed is a small surtax on not just rich, but super rich people. These are folks who make over $1 million a year, and they would just pay the surtax on that amount that they earn over the $1 million threshold. It's far less than the 1% that we are hearing argued about. They would still pay lower Bush tax era rates on the first million, and those that have extensive investment income, which most of them do, would still benefit for those lower rates. Unfortunately, we find people here who are caught up in an ideology that trumps concern for the economy and the typical American family. It was this refusal to consider a balanced approach that is supported by the vast majority of the public that led to the collapse of the so-called super committee. Americans were and are ready for action that is bold, big, and balanced and fair. Now, we actually can start on the road of recovery just by going on autopilot. The default that is set up that will let the Bush-era tax cuts expire unless Congress does something, and moving towards automatic sequestration will actually solve most of the deficit problem that we face just by doing nothing. But we can do better. We can adjust. We can craft. We can focus it to get the most benefit. And we can start with a modest adjustment. I hope my colleagues will not let the worship of the top 1/10 of the economic pyramid trump concerns for the rest of working families and the American economy. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Aslam Hamayan lives in Alabama's 5th Congressional District. He is a father who loves and cares very much about his son, Hamash Khan. At Mr. Hamayan's request, let me share with you and the American people the plight of Mr. Hamayan's son, Hamash Khan. Mr. Khan is an American citizen who, thanks to the Obama administration and the United States government, has been wrongfully held for over a year and a half in Pakistan prisons without indictment for a specific crime or trial. This is Hamash Khan's story. Mr. Khan has lived in America since he was 10 years old. Mr. Khan earned a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees from Georgia Southern University. Following graduation, Mr. Khan worked for Citibank in Pakistan. In 2003, the Musharraf government appointed Mr. Khan to head Pakistan's Punjab Bank. Unfortunately for Mr. Khan, the Musharraf government fell in April 2008. As seems to be so often the case in the world, a new government regime meant that appointees of the past regime risked trouble. In American citizen Hamash Khan's case, the new Punjab government issued an arrest warrant on suspicion of corruption and corrupt practices. Let me emphasize that point. On suspicion of corruption and corrupt practices. Fearing politically motivated reprisals, Mr. Khan fled Pakistan for his home, America. Thereafter, Pakistan sought extradition of Mr. Khan pursuant to the arrest warrant for suspicion of corruption and corrupt practices. Let me be clear on this point. 3 parties are involved in this tragedy: a new Pakistani regime, President Obama and the United States government, and Hamash Khan, an American citizen. The United States had to decide whom to support, Pakistan or an American citizen. The Obama administration chose Pakistan over its own American citizen. Mr. Speaker, it would be wonderful to know why the Obama administration made that decision. In any event, on December 10, 2009, Mr. Khan was arrested by United States Marshals in his office in Washington, D.C., and held without bond for 5 months. Remarkably, persons in Mr. Khan's position are barred from fully defending themselves at extradition hearings. For example, Mr. Khan was barred from presenting evidence to impeach the allegations against him. Mr. Khan fought extradition until it became clear that the severe evidentiary limitations made it impossible for him to defend himself. On May 13, 2010, the United States government forcefully handed Mr. Khan over to Pakistani authorities at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. Mr. Khan was bound in handcuffs and leg chains. With the Obama administration's historic act, Hamash Khan became the first American citizen ever extradited to Pakistan. The one concession the United States State Department received from the new Pakistani regime was a promise that Mr. Khan would be fairly treated under Pakistani law. While anyone hearing this story can suspect political motivations for the prosecution of Mr. Khan by Pakistani authorities, I am not in a position to make a judgment on that issue. But I am in a position to make a judgment about our United States government and its responsibility to protect American citizens. Whether he is innocent or guilty of the charges by Pakistani authorities, Hamash Khan has not been served justice. Under Pakistani law, after arrest for suspicion, Pakistan's National Accountability Bureau can hold a person for up to 3 months, without bail. Within that 3 months, Pakistan's National Accountability Bureau must either indict a held person for specific crimes for trial or order his release. Yet it is now over 18 months since Hamash Khan became the first American citizen extradited to Pakistan. And for those 18 months, Mr. Khan has been held without bail, without indictment, and without trial. Mr. Khan lives in a 6-foot by 6-foot prison cell in Pakistan. I pray the American State Department did not anticipate that Mr. Khan would be held indefinitely without indictment or trial when they forcefully bound and shackled an American citizen and gave him to Pakistan. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I enter this statement on the congressional record. It is time for America's State Department to use whatever influence is necessary and proper to cause Pakistan to treat Mr. Khan in accordance with Pakistan's own law and with international treaty obligations. Justice cannot be served an American citizen in any other way. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Jackson, for 5 minutes.
Who says, Mr. Speaker, the government can't create jobs? The greatest need of the American people today is jobs, but the question before them is this: who is responsible and how should jobs be created? Democrats, Republicans, and independents, liberals, moderates, and conservatives all agree that the private sector is the primary source of jobs. However, with 9% official unemployment, the reality is it's much higher, and 25 million Americans either unemployed, underemployed, it's self-evident that the private sector has not supplied enough jobs and either cannot or will not create enough full-time jobs today to employ the 25 million people who need them. So what do? Throw our hands up and say, nothing can be done, Congress? Democrats generally believe in priming the pump through deficit spending if necessary to create jobs and stimulate the economy in order to put the overall economy back on track during these times when the private sector has obviously failed us. In the past, many Republicans have generally agreed, but this current Tea Party, Republican Party, all of whom have a government job and employ government staffs, don't agree and generally argues that the government can't create jobs. Really. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we are reminded by Michael Hiltzik in his new book, The New Deal, A Modern History Reveals a Different Truth, which is the source of the following information. FDR was sworn into office on March 4th, 1933. He came up with the idea himself of a civilian conservation corps on March 13th, the first jobs program of the New Deal. He presented his idea to White House aide Raymond Moley on March 14th, an idea that he had just come up with the night before. The idea, Mr. Speaker, was to put platoons of young unemployed men to work in the forests and the national parks. That very afternoon, a memo and a skeleton bill went out to the 4 secretaries that would be involved in implementing the CCC plan. Francis Perkins, Labor; Henry A. Wallace, Agriculture; Harold L. Ickes, Interior; George H. Dern, War, the first interdisciplinary agency of the New Deal. The next day, March the 15th, the 4 secretaries returned a joint response proposing a wider relief program encompassing not only a civilian conservation corps, but a public works program and grants in aid to the states and municipalities for relief. On March 21st, FDR sent a message to Congress involving, among other things, his idea of a CCC. In his message, he observed that the more important than the material gains will be the moral and spiritual value of such work. We can take a vast army of these unemployed out to healthful surroundings. Congress debated and passed the Civilian Conservation Corps program in 8 days on March 29th. By early April, the CCC was open for business. The first registrant was 19-year-old Fiore Rizzo of New York, who arrived on April 7th at an Army recruiting station in downtown Manhattan in a cab with 3 of his friends. Rizzo belonged to a family of 13 whose father had not worked in 3 years. So how did these government-created jobs work out? The average enrollee signed up at an age of 18 and a half, stayed for 9 months, 6 months was the minimum tour, 2 years the maximum, and gained up to 30 pounds during his term, thanks to 3 square meals a day served up by the Army quartermasters as fuel for daily labor. The program ramped up quickly. By July, there were 1,300 camps housing 275,000 enrollees, already working vigorously on projects that would rank among the most notable legacies of the New Deal. Before the CCC ended, and with the coming war mobilization in 1942, the CCC built 125,000 miles of road, 46,000 bridges, more than 300,000 dams to check erosion, It planted more than 3 billion trees and strung 89,000 miles of telephone wire. The camps instilled in many of these young men the concept of an American identity. No doubt, the camaraderie was fostered by shared resentment of the camp's martial regiment, the rising of the bugler's call, the mandate to keep their bunks and footlockers in order, the heeding of senior officers without discussion. And, Mr. Speaker, I can only imagine that today these Army quartermasters would demand that our young men pull up their pants. The Army, too, found experience valuable. As War Secretary George Dern confided to Francis Perkins a year into the program, his officers' corps had to learn to govern men by leadership, explanation, and diplomacy rather than just discipline. The knowledge, Mr. Speaker, is priceless. The CCC would serve as a model for national service programs of a later era, such as the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, and VISTA. Quote, "There was pride in the work," one former boy still recalls 60 years later. "We built something, and I knew I had helped. It was something you could take pride in." There wasn't a lot of pride available in those days. Among the New Deal programs, the CCC would inspire almost universal affection, even more so, Mr. Speaker, than Social Security. Mr. Speaker, the federal government can create jobs. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Bartlett, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On November 18th, Ron Smith, a respected and beloved Baltimore area radio talk show host on WBAL, as well as a columnist for the Baltimore Sun, announced his retirement after 26 years because of his diagnosis of inoperable pancreatic cancer and impending death. I ask all of my colleagues to join me, along with thousands of loyal listeners and readers who have expressed their deep appreciation and admiration for Ron Smith. Ron unfailingly contributed a voice of reason with unmatched candor while providing a forum for civil and vigorous debate about politics and policy that is sorely needed everywhere in America. I feel privileged to have been a guest a number of times on Ron's show on WBAL. It was always equally a pleasure and a challenge to meet Ron's high standards. Ron is a true conservative in the classical and historical meaning of the term. With equal enthusiasm and utmost respect, Ron asked tough questions of guests and callers and dissected the arguments of liberal elites, Democrats and Republicans, and others who call themselves conservative. From a vast knowledge of both history and government, Ron Smith shared, and we in Maryland were most privileged to benefit from a succinct and persuasive dialogue and deduction to liberty and reason. Thank you, Ron. Godspeed. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Mrs. Schakowsky, for 5 minutes.
While many hours have been spent by this body debating the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, far too little time has been devoted to the United States' growing dependence on private military contractors, the weapon-carrying, for-profit security companies, mercenaries, who have become integral and counterproductive actors in the war efforts. I believe that increased reliance on hired guns to provide security in conflict zones undermines our policy objectives, and I am not alone. In 2007, then Defense Secretary Robert Gates stated that the mission of many security contractors was, quote, at cross purposes to our larger mission in Iraq, unquote. We should be concerned. Private contractors don't wear the badge of the United States. They answer to a corporation, not a uniformed commander. Our government doesn't even know how many contract personnel we've hired. Because legal jurisdiction remains murky, we may lack the ability to prosecute contractors for alleged violations committed overseas. We need to end our reliance on security contractors in conflict zones. Since 2007, I've introduced the Stop Outsourcing Security Act to phase out the use of for-profit contractors for mission-critical tasks, including security, intelligence, and interrogation in conflict areas. The SOS bill builds on legislation I've introduced since 2001, including the Andean Region Contractor Accountability Act to prohibit military contracting in Colombia and neighboring nations. While the problem applies to other private contractors, there is one company that has become synonymous with misconduct: Blackwater. Operating under a culture of recklessness created by its founder, Erik Prince, Blackwater employees have been implicated in a wide range of alleged misconduct since 2004, from shooting and killing civilians to gun running. 5 former Blackwater executives, including its former president, Gary Jackson, were indicted in 2010 for weapons charges. The company agreed to a $42 million administrative settlement with the State Department for 288 alleged violations of the Arms Export Control Act and international traffic in arms regulations. At least 7 civil suits for alleged abuses by Blackwater personnel in Iraq have been settled, and legal action is still pending against 4 Blackwater guards accused of massacring 17 civilians in Baghdad's Nisr Square in 2007. Further, the Iraqi government, our ally, has repeatedly asked that Blackwater be ousted, leading the United States State Department to refuse to renew the company's contract in 2009. In short, Blackwater, now renamed Z, has been a center of controversy for years in congressional committees, the press, and among members of the military. Yet the company has received over $1.25 billion in taxpayer money. Recently, Mr. Prince has launched a video game called Blackwater, glorifying the discredited company he started. And now Mr. Prince has adopted yet another heavy-handed tactic: attempted intimidation of a member of Congress. Last month, a letter from his attorney was hand-delivered to my congressional office. I am entering the letter in the congressional record. It accuses me of defamatory statements, characterizes my efforts to urge investigations into Mr. Prince as a violation of congressional power, and describes possible legal action if I persist. I come to the floor today because I believe it is my responsibility as a member of Congress to speak out against policies and entities that I believe are damaging to our nation. I want to make it clear to Mr. Prince that I will not stop working to end our reliance on private security contractors or to investigate any and all allegations of misconduct. I want to make it clear to the military men and women who have shared their concerns that they are endangered by the behavior of hired guns employed by Blackwater-like companies, that I will keep speaking out to protect our mission and our brave troops from risk. And I want to tell the families of the men and women who have been killed in incidents involving Blackwater and other such companies that I will continue to push for full investigations and, whenever appropriate, criminal charges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Members are recognized, are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair, not to anyone personally. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Around the world, the rights of workers to organize and bargain collectively through a representative of their choosing with their employer over wages and benefits and conditions of employment is recognized as an important human right and as a hallmark of democratic societies. But in the United States, those rights have been under assault by some politicians and by some employers who want to turn the clock back 3/4 of a century. When workers want to join a union here and bargain collectively with their employer, too many employers intentionally delay, abusing the legal system to deny their employees the rights that we scold developing nations for denying their workers. I rise in support of the proposed National Labor Relations Board rule to streamline and modernize union election procedures, an important and overdue step to restore fairness to our inefficient and outdated system that has allowed too many abuses. The new NLRB rule would speed up union elections, giving employers less opportunity to interfere illegally with organizing drives. The rule also allows smaller groups of workers to form unions. Under the current NLRB system, employers willing to break the law have many opportunities to delay a union election, stretching out the time period when they can intimidate and coerce workers, all in violation of the law. The effect of this rule is to help workers exercise their free choice to join and be represented by a union without illegal interference. Streamlining NLRB elections is a long overdue and a small step to assure workers the right to speak with one voice through a representative of their choosing. But, Mr. Speaker, in the last week, we have heard that Brian Hayes, the only Republican member of the NLRB board, NLRB, is threatening to resign specifically to deny the board the quorum to act under the law, to deny the board the quorum to perform the duties that the law places upon them. Republicans in this Congress have now tried to defund the NLRB, to take away the NLRB's ability to impose sanctions on employers who violate the law, and now they are trying to shut the board down altogether by abusing the other bodies' advice and consent powers to block any new appointments to the board, and by having a Republican member resign specifically to deny the necessary quorum to act. And today, we are considering the so-called Workforce Democracy and Fairness Act. And despite that Orwellian name, the bill is designed to do the exact opposite. It is intended to deny workers the right to unionize without delay and litigation, to deny those rights through delay and litigation, and by allowing employers to decide which employees, which workers get to vote on whether there's a union or not, to stuff the ballot box. Under this bill, to add new workers to the unit that will decide whether to have a union or not. Under the bill, there would be a waiting period if there is an election dispute, whether it's well-grounded or frivolous, a waiting period for pre-election hearing, a waiting period for unions to receive the voter contact list, and the only goal for those waiting periods is delay. The arbitrary waiting periods assure that an election will be delayed, and nowhere is there any assurance that the election will really be held. My Republican colleagues blame frivolous lawsuits for many of the ills of our country, but this bill would reward frivolous lawsuits by providing more time for employers to find fault, real or fabricated, with the election process, and by blocking the NLRB's current rule that would allow elections to move ahead before the complaints are resolved. This bill would allow employers to use litigation, frivolous or legitimate, to block elections. Finally, this bill would allow employers to stuff the ballot box with a radical rewrite of our labor law, so that the employer would decide which employees, which workers get to vote. They can add employees who were never engaged in the organizing drive, and they can keep the list of voters, of the workers eligible to vote, from those supporting the union until just before the election. American workers deserve the same rights that we urge around the world for workers: the right to form a union, the right to speak with one voice, and bargain with their employer, so that our workers can win better wages and benefits and rebuild the American middle class. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the economy received an early holiday gift this past week when Black Friday and Cyber Monday shopping figures outperformed expectations. However, we still face significant challenges. Unemployment remains too high and global markets are showing signs of instability, both of which are the lingering effects of the Great Recession. Casting a grim shadow over all of our actions is the fact that some members of this body still persist in ignoring the public and letting ideology stand in the way of us striking a reasonable balance to tame our national debt and grow the economy. Of note is the recent report released by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office showing that the Recovery Act we passed 2 years ago has been a significant success in an otherwise gloomy economic picture. According to the CBO, the Recovery Act increased GDP growth by up to 1.9% in the third quarter of this year, a quarter in which we had 2% growth. That's an extraordinary impact. Thanks to that Recovery Act, 2.4 million people, according to the CBO, now have a job, and the overall unemployment rate was 1.3% lower than it otherwise would have been if we'd done nothing, as my friends on the other side of the aisle wanted us to do. According to CBO's in-depth analysis, the Recovery Act will continue to have a significant impact on the economy. Although it was designed to operate from 2009 to 2011, CBO found it will continue to drive GDP growth next year, adding 1% to the economy, and will further increase employment by 1 million jobs. After opposing any stimulus action in the midst of the worst economic contraction in 80 years, the Republicans actually criticize the Recovery Act now for the fact that it didn't do enough. That speaks less to the merits of the Recovery Act, I suggest, than it does about the magnitude of the Great Recession. And it is extraordinary chutzpah from the other side to just say no and now criticize the Recovery Act for being inadequate. The Great Recession was, in fact, the nation's worst economic collapse in 80 years. What began in the subprime housing market quickly spread throughout the financial industry, threatening economic ruin. At its height, more than 700,000 Americans were losing their jobs every single month. Millions more lost their homes through foreclosures. The Great Recession was already one of America's worst before President Obama was ever sworn into office, and during that economic maelstrom, our first act in the 111th Congress was to pass the Recovery Act to help on a party line vote, I'm sad to say. Many of my Republican colleagues point to the continued weakness in the economy as an indication of the Recovery Act failure, rather than acknowledging that it's actually a function of the severity of the recession and failing to acknowledge their own supine Darwinian response to it. They claim that as the economic turmoil which began in 2007 raged all around of us, Americans would have been better served had Congress simply done nothing and hoped for the best. And now, as the lingering effects of that recession continue to hold back a robust recovery, they continue to defy reasonable bipartisan attempts to put people back to work and get our country moving again. The Recovery Act cut taxes for 95% of all Americans, both families and small businesses. It kept thousands of teachers, police officers, and firefighters on the job. Recovery Act dollars funded highways and transit improvements in every state, putting hundreds of thousands in the depressed construction industry back to work. There was a time, Mr. Speaker, when cutting taxes and investing in infrastructure was a bipartisan endeavor and had broad Republican support as well as Democratic support. But there's still time for redemption. The President's American Jobs Act now provides another opportunity for our Republican friends to actually partner with Democrats and support economic recovery. The American Jobs Act provides incentives for companies large and small to hire additional workers. It cuts taxes on every working American in order to further spur economic demand. It provides support for sorely needed infrastructure investments to repair America's bridges, roadways, and schools. In short, it builds on the success of the Recovery Act we passed 2 years ago. There are 2.4 million Americans, Mr. Speaker, with jobs today because we took action 2 years ago. With 14 million more waiting, we can't afford now to do nothing. We must act. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this week Pakistani Prime Minister Giuliani said that there will be no more business as usual with the United States. I couldn't agree more. The United States should not be doing business as usual with our unfaithful ally, Pakistan. Since 2002, we have given Pakistan over $14 billion in so-called security-related aid and over $6 billion in economic-related aid. The American people have not gotten their money's worth. Pakistan seems to be the Benedict Arnold nation in the list of countries that we call allies. They have proven to be deceptive, deceitful, and a danger to the United States. Here's some of the evidence. In May of this year, Navy SEALs discovered Osama bin Laden living the High Life in Abbottabad mansion right in the backyard of the Pakistani military community. But Pakistan claimed they had no knowledge of the world's most wanted terrorist that was living right under their noses. This is questionable at best. Mr. Speaker, that dog just won't hunt. Since then, the more we learn about Pakistan, the worse it gets. Shortly after that raid, Pakistan also arrested CIA informants in Pakistan that led the United States to capture or take out Osama bin Laden. Pakistan has tried also to cheat the United States in filing bogus reimbursement claims for allegedly going after militants. 40% of these claims have been rejected by our government. There is more. Pakistan tipped off terrorists making IEDs not once but twice in June of 2011 after we gave them intel on the bomb-making factory locations and asked Pakistan to go after them. CIA Director Leon Panetta asserted that Pakistan has not done enough to bring Osama bin Laden to justice, saying now there is total mistrust between the United States and Pakistan. Meanwhile, Pakistan is chumming up to the Chinese. It sounds to me like Pakistan is playing both sides on the war on terror. This so-called ally takes billions of dollars in U.S. aid while at the same time supporting the militants who attack us. According to Admiral Mike Mullen, the Pakistani government supported the groups who were behind the September 11th truck bombing attack in eastern Afghanistan that wounded more than 70 U.S. and NATO troops. So based on this evidence, I have introduced legislation to freeze all U.S. aid to Pakistan, with the exception of funds that are designated to help secure their nuclear facilities. By sending aid to Pakistan, we are funding the enemy, endangering Americans, and undermining our efforts in the whole region. In the past week, relations between America and Pakistani officials has even further deteriorated. Saturday, NATO and Afghan forces near the border in northwest Pakistan and Afghanistan reportedly came under attack from Pakistani fire and responded in self-defense. 24 Pakistani soldiers were killed. But Pakistan says it was NATO who fired the first shot. Of course, we cannot believe what Pakistan says. They will lie when the truth is obvious. But the facts will eventually come out as to what really happened in this episode. But hatred for America is still on an all-time high in Pakistan. This week on TV, Americans have seen Pakistanis burning American flags and cursing our nation. And just today, in Politico, we have this lovely photograph of Pakistani women proclaiming, "Down with the USA." Pakistan leaders are continuing to vilify the United States on one hand, and on the other hand, take our money. Most importantly, crucial NATO supply routes have been cut off by Pakistan, stopping supplies from getting to our troops in Afghanistan. Monday, 300 trucks full of supplies were turned away at the Pakistan-Afghan border. Pakistan has cut off the supply routes to our troops. Now it's time we cut off the money to Pakistan. Pakistan has made it painfully obvious that they will continue their policy of dangerous, dishonest deceit by pretending to be our ally in the war on terror while simultaneously giving a wink and a nod to extremism. By continuing to provide aid to Pakistan, we are funding the enemy, endangering Americans, and undermining our efforts. 7 in 10 Americans believe we need to stop or decrease foreign aid to Pakistan. After all, it is their money. We should stop foreign aid to Pakistan until we know whose side they're on. We don't need to pay them to hate us. They'll do it for free, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we shouldn't pay them at all. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's now been 2 months since the Occupy Wall Street movement spread all across this country, and despite attempts to marginalize it, parody it, sometimes even suppress it, the fact is that one message has come through loud and clear, particularly from young Americans who have participated in this grassroots movement across the country, which is that the spiraling cost of college is smothering opportunity for thousands and millions of young Americans all across America. And yesterday, the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, presented a speech in Nevada which I think starkly presented the challenge which we face as a nation. Today, the average student loan debt for graduating students is $25,000. That's the average. There are, again, millions of students who are graduating with six-figure debt. And in an economy like the one that they're facing today, this is really an obstacle which will probably burden them for the rest of their lives. And as we are seeing in polls, that the cost of college now is discouraging many younger Americans, high school age Americans, from even considering the possibility of pursuing a higher education degree. First of all, let's be very clear here. The value of higher education is still, despite some critics, indisputable. If you look at the unemployment rate today, 9% across the board in terms of our country, the fact of the matter is those who have pursued high school and above have much lower rates of unemployment today than those who have been unable to reach those training levels and education levels. Nationally, today, the graduation rate of the U.S. has now fallen to 12th internationally. Back in the 1980s, the College Board, which is the organization which tracks graduation rates across the globe, determined that we were #1 in the world in terms of college graduation rates. Yet today, in 2011, we are 12th. If anybody thinks that that is a situation which bodes well for our ability to compete internationally going into the future, then frankly they're not paying attention in terms of where the high-value jobs of the future are. They are in fact in hard sciences. They are in fact in areas of critical workforce needs, which as baby boomers retire in growing numbers across this country, we must have if we are going to continue to be a great nation. Now let's look at what's happening here in Washington. I think one of the reasons why young people are going into the streets of this country is the fact that we have a Congress which is not only out of touch in terms of listening and responding to this, in fact, they want to take us backwards. When I first came to Congress in 2007, a new Democratic majority moved swiftly to pass the College Cost Reduction Act, which was an effort to try and boost the Pell Grant program, which is the workhorse of higher education affordability, a program which basically had been level funded for 6 prior years, despite the fact that higher education costs had gone up 40%. We passed the College Cost Reduction Act, which infused new funding into the Pell Grant program. We cut the interest rates for the Stafford Student Loan Program from 6.4% to 3.2%, and we paid for every single penny of those expenditures by cutting the bank subsidies, which were basically sucking federal dollars away from families and students who need that critical help. Last year, we passed the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act, again with a Democratic majority, which provides for a cap in terms of loan repayments of 15% of your gross or discretionary income and excuses loan repayments after 25 years under the Stafford Student Loan Program. I was pleased that President Obama, again, just a month or so ago, acted to increase the benefit of that program by limiting the discretionary income payments to 10% of income and lowering the forgiveness date to 20 years from 25 years. This is an administration which gets it. This is an administration which understands what middle-class families with children who want to improve themselves and compete in their futures need that kind of assistance. What did this Republican Congress do? We had a Ryan budget last April which gutted, butchered the Pell Grant program and would take us back to 2008 levels. So, for example, in Connecticut, where I come from, the University of Connecticut would have seen its Pell Grant revenue from 2008, which was about $8 million going into the University of Connecticut, would have been cut from where it is today, which is $12 million of annual Pell Grant revenue. $4 million cut to the University of Connecticut, and the grant level for students, the maximum award, would have been cut from $4,500 a year down to roughly about $3,000 a year. That is closing the doors of opportunity to millions of Americans. That's what the Ryan budget values, and that's what its vision was at a time when, again, our country is in crisis in terms of needing skilled, qualified workers to deal with the future challenges. The choice is clear, and for those who care about spiraling education costs, the Democratic agenda is the one that is on your side. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker for the time, and I'm happy to be down here this morning. I often come down here with something on my
mind, Mr. Speaker, and invariably one of my colleagues says something that inspires me even more than what I had on my mind when I came down, and that's the case this morning. My colleague who was here right before me said the value of higher education in terms of future earnings is undisputable. The value of higher education, Mr. Speaker, in terms of future earnings is undisputable. And then went on to talk about all the federal programs that provide money so that people can seek higher education. Now, my question is, Mr. Speaker, if the value is undisputable, why do we have to pay people to do it? If the value is undisputable, why do we have to pay people to do it? That's what happens in this chamber too often, Mr. Speaker. I think back to 1787, the passage of the Constitution. The Constitution, as conservative as it is in terms of preserving individual liberties, would not have passed, would not have been ratified without the addition of the Bill of Rights. Our founding fathers were so concerned about a federal government trying to do too much that the colonies would not ratify the Constitution in the absence of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, which sole purpose is to protect individual liberties. Mr. Speaker, as I look around at what makes America great, it's never something that comes out of this United States House of Representatives. It's something that comes out of a family next door back home. It's something that comes out of a community back home. It's something that comes out of individual liberty and freedom back home. And my job as the representative of 900,000 folks in the great state of Georgia is to protect their liberties from the natural inclination that exists in this body to think they have all the right answers. You know, we talk about higher education, Mr. Speaker. In the great state of Georgia, we have what's called the Hope Scholarship Program. It's funded by lottery money. I would have voted against the lottery, but the lottery won anyway, and now it funds higher education for all Georgians. It's a huge job creation tool. Folks want to come relocate their business to Georgia because they know kids with an accomplished high school record going to be able to go to college for free. Well, that's a state initiative, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to pass a national lottery up here and try to provide free college education for everybody in the country. That's not the right answer. The right answer is to have states, to have local communities exercise those freedoms and implement their ideas back home. You know, when I was growing up, and it didn't occur to me at the time, Mr. Speaker, how meaningful it would be, but there used to be a cliche, when something was really hard, you'd say it takes an act of Congress to solve it. Have you heard that cliche, Mr. Speaker? It takes an act of Congress to solve that because the problem is so hard. It's hard to pass something in Congress. It's hard to get an act of Congress, and yet every time we make a mistake, Mr. Speaker, in the name of trying to do good, in the name of trying to have the best idea, in the name of trying to tell everybody in America, if only they'll do what we tell them to do, they will be happier. Every time we make a mistake, it literally takes an act of Congress to fix it. Mr. Speaker, we're not in charge of providing happiness to America. We are in charge of preserving Americans' freedoms so that they can find their own happiness. Mr. Speaker, there are lots of countries on this planet that do not share the freedoms that we have. There is only one country on this planet that protects individual liberty and freedom as we do. When we talk about the direction of America, Mr. Speaker, we have to decide, are we going to protect those things that have always made this country great, individual liberty and individual freedom, or are we going to go the way of the rest of the world, which is looking to a central government that thinks it has all the right answers? Mr. Speaker, they had it right in the summer of 1787. I hope we get it right here in this Congress, and I thank you for the time.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, NATO airstrikes killed at least 24 Pakistani soldiers in a tragic friendly fire incident that has once again elevated tensions between the U.S. and Pakistan. Regardless of who was at fault, whether our forces were acting in self-defense or had legitimate reason to believe they were firing on insurgents, the Pakistan government is furious and the bilateral relationship is facing a grave crisis. Pakistan has said they are cutting off supply routes into Afghanistan. They have said they will no longer participate in a critically important international conference in Germany next week, a conference that will help chart Afghans' future. And this episode is fanning flames of anti-American sentiment in a country whose people are already hostile. In the last few days, we've seen public demonstrations of Pakistanis burning the U.S. flag and shouting, "Whoever is a friend of America is a traitor of the land." Clearly, Mr. Speaker, instead of winning the hearts and minds, we are giving terrorists a recruitment tool. Pakistan has not always been the most reliable partner, but they are an ally, and let's not forget a nuclear power with whom we share important mutual interests. We need their cooperation if there is going to be political reconciliation and long-term stability in neighboring Afghanistan. This incident leads me to believe very strongly, more strongly than ever, as a matter of fact, that we must redeploy our troops out of Afghanistan. We have very difficult diplomatic work to do there, work that is being complicated, not facilitated by our military presence. After more than 10 years of failed war that is undermining our security interests, it's time to change our role in the region from one of military occupier to one of constructive partner. Pakistan and Afghanistan are the first places we could be implementing the smart security strategy we've talked about I've talked about so many times from this very spot. While it's true that we send enormous amounts of foreign aid to Pakistan, the overwhelming majority of it goes to the military, with very little trickling down to the people. We could instead spend more to boost Pakistan's literacy rates, more investment in key infrastructure projects, or the growth of civil society, or life-changing humanitarian efforts. To give one specific example, Pakistan is one of 4 countries on earth, and Afghanistan is one of the others, that hasn't completely eradicated polio. For pennies on the dollar, compared to our military expenditures, we can help provide the vaccination that would eliminate this dire public threat. Perhaps then we'll be able to change the fact that only 11% of Pakistanis have a favorable view of the United States. Perhaps instead of destabilizing influences of 100,000 troops on the ground, we can build a stronger relationship based on mutual trust, one that promotes peace and empowers the Pakistani people with a humanitarian surge instead of a military surge. Mr. Speaker, it's time for smart security, and it starts with bringing our troops home. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a founding co-chair of both the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus and the Congressional HIV/AIDS Caucus, I rise today to draw attention once again to the ongoing crises of poverty in America. And today I also want to draw particular attention to the impact of poverty on our national fight to stop HIV and AIDS. Mr. Speaker, December 1st is World AIDS Day, and this year marks 30 years after the first discovery of AIDS cases. The United States and the HIV/AIDS community globally have made tremendous progress in our collective response to this domestic and global crisis. We have reduced the stigma surrounding the disease and strengthened education and outreach activities which continue to prevent millions of new cases of HIV worldwide. The scientific community has improved the treatment of HIV and AIDS with antiretrovirals and combination therapies, and recent breakthroughs have revolutionized the way we think about AIDS. We have come a long way in our battle against AIDS. Contracting HIV no longer has to be a death sentence, but we have much more work to do. Not everyone who is HIV positive has access to these life-saving therapies. For the 1 in 3 Americans who are poor or near poor, HIV could still be the same death sentence that it was during the Reagan presidency. Today, nearly 1 in 5 Americans with HIV do not even know their status, and only about half of Americans who do know their status are receiving the treatment that they need. For the 100 million Americans either in poverty or living on the edge of poverty, much more must be done. Access to drug cocktails, high-quality health care, housing, and healthy foods that are all critical for people living with HIV are out of the reach for far too many. Mr. Speaker, 30 years later, we continue to shortchange HIV efforts in poverty-stricken communities. We failed to fully include women in outreach, education, and treatment, and we lack the resources for communities of color. This is just simply unconscionable. Women of color and young gay and bisexual men still receive the most severe burden of HIV in the United States. African Americans represent approximately 14% of the United States population, but accounted for an estimated 44% of new infections in 2009. And we know the numbers are on the rise in Latino communities and Asian Pacific American communities as well. These disproportionate rates of infection are not something that has happened in isolation. People of color continue to face higher rates of unemployment, incarceration, poverty, and near poverty than their white counterparts. We can and we must do much better than this. We must do more for those who are disproportionately impacted by HIV and AIDS, both here in America and around the world. We must provide the science-based, comprehensive sex education that is proven to reduce the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. And we must grow past old fears and engage all community stakeholders to truly end the stigma surrounding the testing and treatment of this disease. We must repeal laws that legalize and promote discrimination and hate. We must support and expand programs which provide critical support for people living with HIV and AIDS, and immediately, mind you, immediately extend treatment to the households, to the thousands of Americans on the waiting list for life-saving drugs. And, of course, we must fully implement the National HIV/AIDS Strategy and support Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. These policies are critical to next steps in our fight to stop this terrible disease. And we must protect the fraction of 1% of the federal budget directed to our global AIDS programs through PEPFAR and the Global Fund. U.S. efforts are dramatically reducing the burden of HIV and AIDS in developing countries, and failing to support these programs would have dramatic national security and diplomatic implications for the United States, not to mention the humanitarian disaster that would occur. That is why last week I was very proud to be joined by over 100 members of Congress in seeking appropriations of at least $5.25 billion for the PEPFAR program and $1.5 billion for Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection.